Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Oscar Piastri has responded to a disastrous couple of weekends for the championship leader, claiming though that he will not change anything about his approach as he intends to hold off Lando Norris and Max Verstappen over the upcoming rounds. But turning up to Mexico, Sergio Perez gives his prediction as to which of those three is going to come out on top. Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, a couple of driver news things. We've got Jack Doohan. According to the race, he was approached this time, not really approached, but he was told by Briatore and Alpine this year that he had chances to get back into the car. He was apparently told that the final 3 Grand Prix of this season, so Las Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, there was a possibility they would put him back in instead of Colapinto. Now, as it's turned out, that's not happening, right? So Colapinto's done a better job lately against Gasly, that is for sure. And also he's got serious backing from Argentina. But it is interesting, or just from South America in general, really. But it is interesting that Jack Doohan was apparently told, you know what, hold on, Jack, you've got a chance, we might put you back in. I don't know, I've kind of felt for a long time now that that was just not going to be happening, but apparently they kind of not promised it him, but told him that there was a good chance it happens. Turned out that's not happened at all, and despite what happened at the end of the US Grand Prix in Austin, bit of a team order drama, I don't think that's going to affect Briatore's decision when it comes to Colapinto, and apparently he will be getting that extension for the team next year, regardless of Jack Doohan and Paul Aron, and maybe even Yuki Tsunoda to a certain extent, putting some sort of pressure on that decision. But Yuki is not yet out of the Red Bull contention, and we'll see that, I'm sure, over the coming weeks, especially if Mexico isn't really the be-all and end-all that we think it is for Yuki, but some have reported for some time that's a done deal anyway, so who knows what happens next. Behrman was a bit concerned in Austin, and understandably, that he might be getting a penalty, well, actually getting a race ban, right, by getting another couple of penalty points. That didn't happen in the end, not yet, but he's still on 10, so he's going to have to be careful, that's for sure. Just another quick comment on this weekend's Grand Prix, because James Allison at Mercedes said that the hard tyre was just not used because it was just too slow, right? They tried the hard, which was an additional step harder than it had been the year before, and they've done the same thing, Pirelli, in Mexico as they did in Austin. So this weekend, instead of the C3, C4, C5, it's the C2, C4, C5. And what that does, the intention of Pirelli is to make it so that if you want to one-stop, you have to use the harder compound of tyre that you maybe would like to. I think the teams would like to bring the C3, and then they would probably run a C3, C4 one-stop. But with a C2, C4, that's just going to be notably slower. So the intention of Pirelli is that either you do the C2, C4, as in the hard medium one-stop, or you do a two-stop. You run C4, C5, C5, or something like that. The problem is, what the teams do instead is they do a C4, C5 one-stop, and they just manage like crazy, right? Because that will give them a shorter race time, and even if it doesn't, it's pretty difficult to overtake nowadays anyway. Mexico, that has been the case for sure, given how tricky that final sector is to follow. Overtaking is a serious challenge. So this is what the teams will probably do again, is that Pirelli will try and make the racing more interesting with their tyre selection, but it will probably backfire again. And if it does, then they really need to go back to the drawing board in what they're doing here. Laura McKees has been cooking lately on the track for sure, but also it seems they've got a deal off the track as well. Red Bull, I think from Brazil, will be unveiling an 8-week McDonald's partnership. They're doing a couple of things for this. But this is what it's going to look like, right? So here's the McDonald's logo on the Red Bull. These are in some of the renders that have been floating around. And yeah, we'll see. It's during the Brazilian Grand Prix weekends. They're going to do some sort of like drive-through near the track, which is going to be all set up like a Red Bull pit stop, basically. So, you know what? Fair play, I guess. Red Bull are doing their best, and they've got a lot of yellow, a lot of gold on the livery right here. But I can't imagine that's going to be Max Verstappen's main focus. There was also another bit of drama regarding Max Verstappen. So there was this post that came out that shows, if you guys are not a big fan of the FIA and the way that they're run, then you might enjoy this a little bit, although it is a little concerning. So effectively what this article describes is how there's a couple of people here, cybersecurity guys basically, and they tried to see if they could hack the FIA, but not doing anything that was particularly complicated. So all they basically did is they made an account on the FIA website, They then sent like an HTTP request to see what the responses were, and they found out that there's a role that they could be allocated, and they found that they could try and allocate themselves an admin role. So they literally just did it as very simple put request to the FIA website. And they found that their account was now having admin privileges. And then when they logged in, they were able to see all of the information with regard to all of the drivers. Of course, they've blocked it out here, and because of this, the FIA have now apparently dealt with the problem. But you've got to think, right, like for an organisation that's as important as the FIA are, to have just no security at all for any of this stuff, right? Because they logged in, they found all these comments on the drivers, platinum, career out of racing, etc., agree with 1 grade lower, and then they went on to Max Verstappen's page, and they found his CV. I don't know what Max's CV would look like, but they've got his CV, they've got his official super license, they've got his passport, right, and his identity, and all of that stuff is just sitting there on the website. And effectively, anyone with a little bit of knowledge about cybersecurity or whatever, like, I'm obviously not knowledgeable enough to do this, but these guys put this article together, was shown how they just exposed all of this, right? And this was the case for everyone. So, yeah, the guy puts out a tweet and says it literally took 10 minutes to access his passport, driver's license, personal information, and every other F1 driver or like any other driver that the FIA covers. If you want to find, at least to this point, any of the sensitive data. Now, obviously, there is a point in making this public for these guys because the intention is for the FIA to handle it, right, and deal with the security issues. Whether we trust the FIA to appropriately do that, I think is an interesting question, to be fair. But in Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. The other thing regarding the FIA, last weekend, you guys remember the drama when Red Bull were fined €50,000 because one of their mechanics re-entered the area, not quite onto the track, but he was in an area that he shouldn't have been during the formation lap. And according to everyone on the grounds, what that mechanic was trying to do was interfere with the piece of tape that McLaren put on the wall so Lando Norris can line up properly in his grid box. Now, this is all pretty dramatic. There were questions on sportsmanship and integrity and all that stuff, but it's not something that the FIA cares about. They do care, though, if you're going near the track when you shouldn't be. So I thought it was interesting what Lauren McKees had to say on this, because he says, it was a misunderstanding. I think the bottom line is, Red Bull aren't going to take a €50,000 fine week on week to try and deal with Lando's tape. Probably not. But you never know, right? So McKees, though, says, I've spoken with the members of our team and they are convinced they followed the instructions of the stewards. It was a misunderstanding. We watched the video with the FIA. It's definitely something we can manage better. We do not believe we have ignored any instructions because we've not received them. So the point is that the mechanic maybe wasn't told that, oh, you can't go there, but he did. And he's not really allowed to, and he probably knew that. But, you know, they tried to deal with the McLaren Norris tape. I think the interesting thing is that he mentions nothing about the tape, right? He doesn't deny that's what his mechanic was doing. So, look, McKees on the outside is a very different character to Horner, for sure. But at the end of the day, many of the same people that were there in the Horner era are still there. So we are going to see these type of antics. And who knows who's going to win the championship at this point. I've seen all sorts of polls and predictions over the last few days. Everyone seems to have a different opinion. Fight for first between Piastri and Norris, or fight for the fifth with Max Verstappen on the radar. There was also this interesting article that describes, if I translate it again into English, how Horner was willing to just write off the RB21. He wanted just to call it a day and not go any further with the development. And this was, I think, a big debate internally. Now, of course, you can roast Christian Horner all you want and everything. Of course, he was sacked at the start of July, given the fact that they have made progress and now it does look like Max actually could be in with a fight. But you can understand Christian's opinion, right, if he was not keen to continue. Also, it's worth noting that many of the developments that we have seen that have improved the car, they did happen under Horner's reign, right? They were designed in May and June, in probably early July, and then have come to fruition over the last couple of months. But during that period, Horner was not convinced this was a good idea. He knows, Horner, and well, he knew, right, he's no longer part of the team, how important next year's engine changes are, and the idea of putting everything possible into 2026 on paper seems like a good decision, right? So apparently Horner was not very willing to continue with the 2025 project, but some of the team were, because they argues that, look, we've lost our way with this car. If we're going to have any confidence, if we're going to have any ability to believe that we can actually take next year's car in the right direction and understand some of the flaws that we have uncovered in our own ability and also in our own car during this era, we need to try and fix it, right? And as this is what the article describes, the SF25 probably doesn't matter how much Ferrari do to that car. It was never going to win, right? Really, right? They had fundamental issues. They tried to fix it and it didn't work. Whereas the RB21 clearly is a machine that is capable once they, effectively were able to run it lower, I think, and they figured out a couple of ways why they could make that happen. So it's interesting kind of battle of opinions, I suppose, at Red Bull that has resulted in a situation that no one really would have predicted that Max could be in the mix. This is even what Helmut Marko says. At one stage when we weren't competitive, I would say he lost a bit of interest. He was more interested in GT racing. So to keep him in a good mood, I was talking about Nürburgring and stuff like that. But now the car is working and his success at the Nürburgring, I would say 2/10 came just because he's really motivated. He's enjoying it. You don't hear him shouting. He's smiling. That's what you need. So I love this implication from Marko that Max just finds 2/10 because he's locked in. But I think there is probably some element of truth there, right? That Max, a few rounds ago, after the Dutch Grand Prix, when he was pretty dejected in his championship lead for Piastri was 104 points. That was his deficit. It was clearly a different scenario, whereas now Max is giving it absolutely everything. He's totally locked in all the weekends. He knows that trying to find a little smidge of performance here or there could be a key difference maker. And if he can find an extra little bit on where he would have been before and the car is better, all of a sudden, Max is clearly right in the mix. And as I said yesterday, I think he's the favourite for pole every single weekend. There is an argument as to whether you actually want to be on pole in Mexico. Max has been there and held on before, but Max has also very much been third and come round to lead, right? So, I think Max is in a great position in Mexico, but overtaking round they will be difficult. I think that the McLaren is very quick in the race, but if Max, I think, is the favourite for pole, so it's going to be very interesting to see if Max does start on pole in Mexico, whether he can hold on for turn one, because, we know what history says there. Third place also wins more often around Mexico than second place does on the grid, which you would probably expect, but is still pretty interesting. So everyone's got their opinion on who's the favourite. Is it Piastri because he's still got the points lead? Is it Lando because he's close and he's got momentum? Or is it Max who has barrels of momentum, but also so many questions still around whether Red Bull can keep up their recent performance and all this? Sergio Perez, who you'd probably expect to predict Max, says, tough question, think it could be Max. So he's talking about who the World Championship's going to be. Look, it's in Perez's best interest. If Max makes this comeback, it makes Perez look a little better, just because it proves that Max is just completely different gravy. But as we discussed the other championship contenders, worth talking about the importance of lap one and the fact that Lando Norris in his career is one of the worst starters basically in history. Now, these numbers are a little interesting because, for example, Hamilton, he's done about 375 Grand Prix and he's been on pole at 104 of them, right? So obviously on those occasions he cannot gain positions. So if you're on pole all the time, or at least a large chunk of the time, then it's kind of tough to gain positions from there. Now, Max Verstappen, he's done maybe 200 and, I don't know what it is, 250, 260 races now. Maybe it's a little bit less than that. But I think it's mid-200s anyway. Max has had, 50-ish pole positions, 48 or something. So, again, you can look at the numbers in that sense. But with some outliers, the point is, Fernando Alonso is, as everyone knows, an absolute demon on lap one. This has always been the case. It's actually kind of incredible because a lot of these numbers are from drivers who we expect to qualify quite well, right? And as a result, you tend to see negative numbers here because if you qualify very well, it's unlikely you're going to gain too many positions on average if you qualify poorly. But even Alonso, obviously nowadays he's not qualifying great. But still, these numbers are remarkable, that 42% of races he's gaining positions lap 1. For Max, that's 28%. For Lando, that's only 10%, and he's losing positions on 40% of his Grand Prix. Now, I watch a lot of these starts this season, and I do think sometimes Lando gets a bit unlucky, but the trend is very clear. And even it was true, I guess, in Austin as well, when he got done by Charles Leclerc at the first corner there. So, again, there are circumstantial things here in play, but worth looking at. Bob Jane 2 puts this together, that Norris's starts have to be better if he's going to close out this championship, is the bottom line. But what does Oscar Piastri have to say about it? Toto Wolff says, look, he wouldn't want to be Oscar Piastri. He thinks it's a psychological advantage to be behind. You've not got the pressure on you if you're Max, really. You've not got the pressure on you so much if you're Lando either. Oscar definitely has the pressure on him. We've got graphics from F1 today saying, oh, he's been in the championship lead for 186 days. But is that going to stay the same? So Piastri said, going into this upcoming weekend, after what happened in Austin, and we got media day tonight, some more comments I'm sure to come, but he says, look, I'm not going to change my approach. It's been a couple of difficult weekends, but I'm just going to turn up to the weekends. Yeah, the gap's been a little bit bigger before than it is now, but my mentality hasn't changed. It won't now. I'm just going to turn up, do the best job I can, and the results will take care of themselves. So, look, if Oscar can execute in the way that he talks, then yeah, sure, he's going to probably hold on and win this championship. But we know how things have been, and we also know that despite the talk about, oh, well, is the McLaren the same car that it used to be? What's happened for this level of performance to decline in the way that it has? Those are interesting and potentially valid questions. But if you look at Piastri's performances the last couple of years, certainly last year in this post-European stint, it wasn't good last year, right? Lando pretty much just wiped the floor with him around about this time last year. Last year in Mexico, I mean, in his first year in 2023, Piastri was 8th in Mexico. Last year in 2024, when Lando arguably could have won if not for the drama with Max, but Lando was 2nd at this Grand Prix last year. Piastri was 8th again. So it's not been a great track for Oscar, right? As I say, Mexico, the last 2 years in a row, he's finished 8th. And Lando's had better results than that. And actually, Lando's results have got better and better. I think every time he's been to Mexico, his placing gets higher. And last year he was 2nd. So again, just some weird statistics to throw out there. But the point is that this stint last year was a tough one for Piastri. And yeah, he's got what it takes for sure. We've seen that for a large part of the season. He's made a lot of moves. He's executed in a very impressive way. But the pressure is on him very heavily, right? All the eyes are on whether Piastri is going to bottle this championship. That's the way that people are looking at it. And that's a challenging thing to deal with, especially when you've got Max Verstappen chasing you down. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Just one final thing, I guess. There's actually another championship contender, and it's George Russell. Now, technically, it doesn't need DNFs all across the board, right? Because if Russell wins everything, he gets to 393. So he actually has about a 50-point buffer to play with. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's not going to happen. But it's pretty interesting to think about. Maybe the 0.1% chance of an outsider could well still happen. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.